I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Weiss.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. This is part of the Top VC series and Top Israel Business Leader series. Past episodes include one with Moise Navon of Mobileye, when he talks about the Mobileye journey of being acquired by Intel for $15.3 billion. Yuri Adoni is the author of Unstoppable Startup. You could check that out. And Jonathan Medved, founder of CEO of Our Crowd, the world's largest equity crowdfunding platform. And Elie, today's guest, I was watching you speak in a panel on an Our Crowd conference. And Yossi Vardi has some amazing stories, so check that episode out, including his biggest wins and even his biggest misses as an investor. And before I introduce today's guest, this episode is brought to you by Rise 25, which I co-founded with my business partner, John Corcoran. And at Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their Dream 100 relationships. We help you run your podcasts. The number one thing, Elie, in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at a way to give to my best relationships. And a podcast over the past, since 2008, has allowed me to profile some of the people I really admire and who have become friends. And I've been able to refer people to them and vice versa. And so if you have questions about podcasting, go to rise25.com. Actually, Elie, sometimes I talk about it, sometimes not. It was actually inspired by my grandfather, who was a Holocaust survivor, and him and his brother were in concentration camps in Nazi Germany. And there's an interview that the Holocaust Foundation did with my grandfather that is on my About page. And I feel like it's helping people leave a legacy, as well. So check that out if you have a chance. I am excited to introduce today's guest, and big thank you to Craig Weiss, who introduced me. Craig Weiss runs retainerclub.com, and their podcast is In Your Face, so check it out. Elie Wurtman is co-founder and partner at PICO Venture Partners, which is an early stage venture capital firm headquartered in Jerusalem. His investments include Vroom, which hit a market cap of $5.5 billion after its IPO. Spot.io, which got acquired by NetApp for $450 million. Gloat, ChargeAfter, AutoLeadStar. We actually had founder Aaron Horowitz, and he's been on the podcast. He's amazing. And AutoLeadStar, check it out. And prior to PICO, Elie was general partner at Benchmark Capital, worked with Jerusalem Venture Partners. He launched his first company in 1993. I don't even know what the internet looked like then. There was really no internet. I don't know what it was. He took 3 companies from founding to IPO. He was co-founder and CEO of Deltathree, Jerusalem's first unicorn, which we'll talk about. His other notable startups include IronSource, where he was an external director and active mentor. He was co-founder and lead investor in Vroom, which I mentioned, and he's founder of PICO Kids, a social enterprise focused on childhood education in Jerusalem. And he also found, if he wasn't busy enough, Bat Shlomo Vineyards, a boutique winery in northern Israel. Elie, thanks for joining me.
Thank you. That was quite an introduction. I think I'm going to have to make it shorter.
It's well-deserved. I mean,
a lot of okay.
It's well-deserved. And I wanted to start off with, how do you meet Craig Weiss?
Craig Weiss lived in Jerusalem briefly, and he had just written a book with his brother about the founding generation of Israel during the War of Independence, the American volunteers who came to Israel. And I heard him pitch his book. It was a speaking tour. And I was very moved by what he had written and what he had said and his passion for Israel. And I'm very passionate about Israel. And, I said I'd be happy to follow up. And lo and behold, I invited him for a Shabbat dinner, as many people tend to do here. And it's a long time, I don't want to say, but more than 20 years later, we're still very good friends and business partners on many occasions.
So talk about your discussions on Enjoy.
I was, Craig lived here. He moved back to the U.S. and he called me up. He said, Elie, I have this family business my brother started. Would it be okay if I called you every once in a while just to get some advice? Well, every once in a while, not only did it become every week, it became every day, and definitely every waking hour when our time zones overlapped. At the point Craig had a big vision, and I share people's big visions. It's what I do. I work with entrepreneurs on helping them realize big ideas. He wanted to obsolete cigarettes, right? That was a very big idea, and I took an interest in it, in joining him as chairman of the company, and to actively help them build a company. And that's something that just happened over time, literally over the phone, between Jerusalem and Scottsdale, Arizona. With time, I also convinced him that he would be the best CEO for the company, but that's a whole different story.
We definitely got into that a little bit as well. Back to, so you're 8 and you moved to Israel. Why?
That is correct. So I grew up in a family that was very ideological. They saw an historic moment in the rebirth of Israel, right? You yourself mentioned that your ancestors were survivors of the Holocaust. And this moment of the creation of the state of Israel called many people to come here to be part of the building and founding of this country. I was just a child. I was brought along. But definitely my entire adult life, even if I complained as a kid, why were my parents taking me away, has been very much as a builder, of this country. And I've expressed that in being a economic builder, big entrepreneur in job creation. But it's really a special part of living in Israel is the ideological framework in which we live. I believe very similar to the way many people live in the U.S. as well, right? Which is, it's a young country. It was founded by visionaries with an ideological bend towards building something different that stood for something. And it's very much how I live my life here. It's very much how I see continuity in my identity as somebody who was born in the U.S. but grew up here, and very much feel at home in both countries.
What did you learn from your mom? What did you see your mom doing? Because she was an activist.
I tell people, I don't have an MBA. I don't have a degree in economics. I don't have a degree in technology. I tell people that the best training, if you want to be an entrepreneur, is to be an activist. And probably the next best thing is to be the child of an activist, to see somebody who is out to accomplish something very big. In her case, it was bringing down the Soviet Empire for human rights, to give people the right to immigrate, to give Jews the right to practice their religion, to return to their homeland. And doing that with minimal resources, making a lot of noise, in the public sphere, applying political pressure. We're going to call it different forms of marketing. And the product happened to have been human rights and freedom of immigration.
Good product.
It's a great product, right? Mm-hmm. And learning how people organize, how they work together, how they do things across borders. Really, as I look back at my career, is what I've done, right? I've worked with in many cases, a small band of entrepreneurs wanting to change the reality in an industry, right? And organizing with small means compared to the big corporates that we usually take on as startups. And you'll see the parallels, right? It makes total sense, right? But it took me a long time to realize it. But definitely growing up with activist parents, my mom and my dad are very much a framework for what I have done throughout my career.
Yeah. And Elie, tell me about what's a story that you remember, maybe at the time you didn't realize it impacted you, but looking back from your mom doing her thing as an activist.
Yeah. So, I spend a lot of time as a business executive thinking about the need to document things, to communicate clearly, to share, with other people. And I can remember as a child, late at night, because of the time zone differences, my mom and my dad being on the phone with cassette recorders, right? You're sitting in front of a microphone right now. We're using some hard disk space in the cloud, but back in the day, it was a microphone connected to a tape recorder. with a suction device attached to the back of a handheld telephone, recording phone calls, right, of my mother calling into Moscow, Leningrad, other pieces across the Soviet Union, speaking to activists on the ground there, speaking to people who were organizing, documenting those phone calls, writing them up, getting the word out there. And as you know, once again, it's a reflective moment, and I thank you for helping me to remember that. You know, when we come up with ideas today, and we're trying to do small things or big things, you know, here in Jerusalem or wherever you might be as an entrepreneur, and communicating with the world and sharing the messages, not just what happened, or not just what you're working on, but why you're working on it, what you're doing, right? The underlying mission, and the same things that I probably learned or saw as a child are things that I apply to my business and my entrepreneurial endeavors as I go forward.
Yeah, Elie, as your mom and dad took on a country as their activism, you tend to take on technology, disrupt technology, disrupt major industries with technology, and you co-founded Deltathree. So, and took on the telephone industry. What did you see at the time? What was the original idea?
Well, communications are a very basic human need. We like to connect with people. I think it was AT&T, right? The old advertisement, reach out and touch someone, right? This idea of connecting people. There was one problem. It was very, very expensive. It cost several dollars a minute to make an international phone call. I was a student in the United States, and I would actually schedule with my parents 10 minutes a week. It was like a holy 10 minutes. And it was, why did we only speak for 10 minutes? And on a Sunday morning, it was the discounted rate. And it only cost us $20 for that phone call, right? It was $2 a minute. As you said, 1993, I don't even remember the internet. One of the early startups when the internet was starting was an Israeli company called VocalCheck. And they are one of the true pioneers. It was back when Netscape was the main browser. It wasn't even version 1, it was version 0.97. And this young Israeli company had figured out how to translate your voice signal into a digital signal and put it over IP networks, which were just developing around the world with the advent of the internet. I tried this. I called my partner in New York and I said, this is this incredible new technology. Let's try it. But the next thing we said to each other was, what if you could pick up a regular telephone, make that international phone call at a fraction of the cost of what AT&T or MCI or Sprint would be charging at the time? And that's what we set out to do. And we did it from Jerusalem. And we, in a very short period of time, in 3 years, had built a global network connecting the public switch telephone network to the international IP networks with this technology that converted voice to an IP signal, and built a company, global company, operating throughout the world, and literally being at the forefront of lowering the cost of international calling. And that is, my answer to the question when everyone said, well, what are you going to do when AT&T takes you on? I said, with technology and speed and creativity, we will, forge a new way. And that's what we did.
When you're paving a new way and, you're kind of creating this path that no one's been on before, what were some of the biggest challenges during that time?
The internet didn't work the way it does today, and things don't always go as planned. You set up a server in Moscow, or better yet, I flew to Moscow to figure out, where I can lease IP lines from, and the only IP network in town is the old KGB network, and my meeting is with a general and bottle of vodka, and not, a business executive at the phone company. But literally, those were some of the types of experiences we had. I sent one of my guys to Colombia, the country, I said, don't come back until we have an IP network that we can connect to. And he calls me, he's in the middle of a jungle, and there's these like he's not sure when he's on the back of this Jeep if he's going into some drug dealer's den or a communications company. But sure enough, when he gets there, there's these huge satellite, receiving stations that are transmitting over MCI's network IP lines. The challenge is when you're doing something new, is finding partners, it's building relationships, it's taking, this leap of faith that it's all going to work out, right? I was young and naive, of course, but sending an executive to, what's an executive? We were all 20 something, right? Our training wasn't very significant in terms of world experience. Figuring out with a sense of mission and purpose that we were going to do something and doing whatever it takes to get it done is the ethos, of an entrepreneur. And I would say specifically an Israeli entrepreneur, anything is possible. All you have to do is go out and, do it. Or as Nike used to say, or probably still say, just do it, right? And that is the mantra for me. It's the mantra for many Israeli entrepreneurs. And basically facing things that seem, insurmountable or out of a movie, eventually become possible when you are on the path of trying to achieve your goals.
Yeah, the training was not in navigating the jungle, I guess you could say. But, I mean, that's so interesting, Elie, because so you going to Moscow, are you speaking the language? How does that meeting go down? I mean, I picture you in sunglasses, a trench coat, and a briefcase, like it just seems like an interesting business meeting, I guess you could say.
So for starters, there was a trench coat, right? I live in Israel. It's a pretty warm climate here. I get to Moscow and I was freezing. And, we went out and I bought a trench coat to keep warm. That meeting, and, I really have not thought about this story in many, many years. I literally show up 11 o'clock in the morning. There's this guy, he's a former general equivalent in KGB or the Soviet Army or whatever it was at the time.
I mean, I would be scared going into this.
Vodka on the table.
I would be worried.
Yeah. It's good to be young, right? Because we're naive and we're not scared as easily as we are today. When you're young, you're somewhat invincible. In hindsight, I should have been very scared and very nervous. The vodka gets opened up, the glasses are poured. It's explained to me that we're going to drink vodka while we have this discussion and negotiation on pricing on the old KGB network. And it won't surprise you when I tell you that some of the details are a little hazy, but I do remember having to excuse myself, take a short nap, and then coming back to complete the process.
It is wild. I'm a lightweight when it comes to drinking, so they would definitely have an advantage on me. So then what happened kind of at the end, towards the end of Deltathree? You took it public?
Yeah. So going public is not the end. It's sometimes the end for venture capitalists. It's the beginning for many companies, right? But it was an amazing run, kind of from just over 3 years, May 96 to November 99. We started a company that we couldn't convince anybody to invest in. They're like, what are you doing? I think I had offered some guy like 10% to the company for $10,000. He turned me down. The punchline is that company at its peak value was worth $2 billion, right? So that was a $200 million position. He might be listening to your show. I'm not going to say his name, but he's originally from Chicago, and he remembers that story. We literally, the first round, we raised $117,000 from individuals who weren't sure if they were making a donation to Israel or investing in the company. It was mostly from Americans, people in New York. And we went public November 99. We start the morning at a $500 million market cap. We end the day at $1 billion market cap. So it was a double, very similar to the Vroom story, which we'll talk about later. It stays above $1 billion for over a year. And then, as many people remember, the markets crashed, right? The dot-com bubble burst, the telecommunications bubble burst, 9/11, second intifada in Israel. We went from the best of times to the worst of time. The company survived. I met somebody a couple of years ago. He says, Elie, you don't remember me. You hired me 18 years ago as a junior network operations center, hourly worker or shift worker, something like that. I just left the company, 18 years later.
Wow.
So companies have a long life beyond the original kind of entrepreneurial founders period. Many founders stay with their companies, throughout. I'm more of a serial entrepreneur. I've started companies and we'll go on to the next thing and the next thing. I guess it's my version of having issues concentrating. But of course, I've gone on to be an investor as well. But Deltathree, it didn't kind of stay up there from a valuation perspective, but it had a very long life and provided jobs and income for many people for a very long time, something I'm very proud of course.
That's amazing. Yeah, that the person was there 18 years later. So you mentioned Vroom, and we talked about, disrupting major industries with technology, the telephone, now the auto industry. So what happened with Vroom?
Yeah. So I'm not a car guy. I until recently, I was driving a 10-year-old car, and it's filled with scratches. And yet somebody calls me up in the summer of 2014 and says, Elie, I invested in this dealership in Grand Prairie, Texas. I'm like, I don't think I've ever been to Texas, let alone Grand Prairie, wherever that is. He says, look, I know you're in between things. Can you fly over there, check it out? They need somebody with your venture mindset. And, I'm like, if I'm coming to the US, I will come see you. And sure enough, I was. And I called a very close friend of mine, Alon Bloch, who he and I have worked with off and on since 2003. I said, Alon, would you come with me and take a look at this thing? And it was my first time in a dealership in the US, and maybe ever, as I think about it, maybe once. And I could not believe that this is how people buy cars, right? I was one of the, as a consumer, I was an early adopter on Amazon. I think my account goes back to 1998. And I do most of my consumption online. And this idea that there's a salesperson that I have to speak to, and it's somewhat unpleasant, untrustworthy, it just made absolutely no sense to me. At the same time, it's probably pretty naive. Like in my head, as an entrepreneur, I'm like, oh, we can build a website, we can have the inventory on there realigned, we can have fair pricing, and we'll ship it anywhere in the United States. And if you're not happy, we'll take it back in 7 days, which, to me made total sense. Everyone's like, people need to do a test drive, they need to kick the tires. And very quickly, I came to the conclusion that was all make-believe. It was make-believe for an era when, sales were one-to-one, where you wanted to get the consumer into a car for a test drive to do a high-pressure sale. But the modern consumer is very well educated, researches everything online. They actually know what they want to buy before they buy it. And why not offer fair pricing based on the algorithms online? Why not deliver delight to the end customer? And we're all entrepreneurs are inspired by other entrepreneurs, and you may have read the book by Tony Hsieh about Zappos or Delivering Happiness. And why could we not do the same thing with cars? Why can we not take the single worst consumer experience, shopping experience in the United States, buying a car, let alone buying a used car, which is probably even worse. My friends joked with me for a very long time that I was a used car salesman, and turning it into a honest, fair, delightful, trustworthy experience. And that's what we set out to do when we founded Vroom. When we took this dealership, which was called Auto America, and transformed it into Vroom and renamed it and built it into a technology company.
So where does that stand today? Because it actually also had an exit.
Yeah. So, when I set out to do this with a loan, we both said to ourselves, this might be our biggest accomplishment yet. And this was at the beginning. And we kind of just felt that the size of the opportunity and the fragmentation of the market and the broken business process around this industry lent itself to a very large outcome. And Vroom went public in June of this year, not so long ago, in the middle of the beginning of the COVID storm, before we knew how bad it really was. It seemed like the world was coming to an end. And yet that storm ended up being the perfect storm for Vroom, right? You don't have to go into a showroom. You don't have to speak to anybody. The car gets delivered to your front door. All those millennials who said they were never going to drive, all of a sudden don't want to take public transportation. They want to own cars, right? So everything was lined up for the Vroom business model, actually accelerated by what was going on outside. So a public offering in June acted like the perfect timing. As I said to you, we went out, I think, that morning at a $2.2 billion market cap. And by the close of the day, we were at 5 billion. And that was the number which my partner and I said, maybe this was the one. We had done some amazing things. We had built unicorns before. Maybe this would be the first one to become a very large company. And it happened much quicker than we believed it would. It was a very exciting day, as you can imagine.
Really exciting day. And, the thing is, I'm curious. So you went through the dot-com bubble, you went through the 2008 financial crisis, and now Corona. Do you see, did those going through those eras prepare you for this at all?
Absolutely. So in March 5th, I came back to Israel from a ski trip, and kind of word of Corona was becoming more robust, right, and more publicized. And the crisis had started to really get out of control in Europe, and we remember the horror stories from Italy and other places. And it became clear to me that it was time to go in the bunker, right? And it hadn't yet kind of hit the mainstream, but not only was a crisis coming, it was going to be of epic proportions. And I spent the next days and weeks on daily calls, morning to night, with CEOs and founders in our portfolio at PICO who had never been through a crisis before. They didn't know what a crisis means. And many of these companies were out in the cliff, facing sudden death. If you hadn't raised capital recently, the idea that it would be possible to raise capital seemed impossible. Now, things have worked out a little bit differently than we predicted, but preparing for the crisis, being ready for the crisis, was something which to me had become second nature. And here in Israel, unfortunately, we've been through even more crises with various flare-ups that we've experienced here with terrorism and other things. Thank God it's been very quiet for very long, but crisis is second nature, and managing through crisis towards positive outcomes has really become a specialty of mine. The story, as you know, is that most digital companies have accelerated, right, and have grown by leaps and bounds, and that if anything, the Corona crisis has been an accelerator of digital transformation, digital business. but preparing for crisis and getting companies' balance sheets in order and getting people ready that they have to do the right thing when crisis is upon us, right? That it's not about firing people, it's about everyone tightening their belts so that we can get through this to the other end together and intact. Those are the talks I had daily with entrepreneurs as we kind of made our way through March and April. By May, we were experiencing rapid growth. It was almost kind of like I got to pinch myself that that this is actually the perfect storm, as I said before, for digital transformation.
Elie, I want to talk about your advice in a crisis. Any of the companies you remember talking to and what you said to one of them, but I do remember you saying something about I don't remember which past company, but you said a rocket was shot at Israel. You were seeing if it was going to be actually, thwarted, and then you went back to the business deal. So this stuff happens even despite. Doesn't have to be the dot-com bubble, doesn't have to be the 2008 financial crisis, but this stuff has happened throughout. What was your advice to one of the people? Do you remember?
Yeah, I mean, it's fundamentally, I think it's pretty basic, human advice. Worrying is not going to get us anywhere. It's staying positive. It's understanding that relationships are long and forever, and doing the right thing, right? And it's, for me, the core values, right, of how you handle things in this moment is different. I mean, the rocket is different from COVID, where I was really worried about companies going bankrupt. And you might say that a rocket hitting your office could be pretty fatal as well, right? But the attitude is the same, right? It's moving forward. It's looking past. There's a poem which I love called The Trough, which is just a reminder that kind of we will see the horizon again. It's basically a positive outlook on life and on the world. And sometimes our job, just mentoring entrepreneurs or leaders, is reminding them that we're going to get back on top. We always do, right? Humanity has always kind of gotten through these things and moved forward, no matter how bleak they may seem. And having the strength to do that is important. And sometimes we need people to hold our hand to get there.
Totally. We talked about the, transforming, the auto industry, and talk about AutoLeadStar. And how did you meet Aaron Horowitz?
Yeah, so Aaron is really one of my favorite people, and he's going to have to listen to hear that. I'm not going to tell him, and you're not going to tell him I said that. He is an amazing entrepreneur. He was a social activist, going back to our earlier conversation, before he was a business entrepreneur. He built one of the greatest social enterprises here in Jerusalem and Israel, and I think today it's international, called Present Tense. And he is exactly the kind of person I like to invest in. We had met here in Jerusalem in the entrepreneurial community, and I was immediately interested in who he was as a person, the values that drove him, that obviously succeeding in business had important, financial KPIs attached to it, but he was interested, as I am, in building the economy of our city and building the economy of our country, and ultimately using technology to transform business. And I knew a lot about the auto industry because of Vroom, and he was working on various AI technologies to enhance consumer behavior around customer acquisition and all sorts of things online. And we got into a mentorship relationship. I was not an investor in this company initially, but I really liked him as a person, and we spent a lot of time together. And some people you give advice to, and they kind of nod their head and they move on. And at one point, I had suggested something to Aaron, and he went out and did it, and came back a few weeks later and said, "What do you think?" And I realized that there could be a tremendous opportunity to work with somebody like Aaron, who was interested not only in what I had to say, was willing to act on it, but it was also ideologically driven the same way I was. And we've become very good friends over the years. And I've had the great pleasure of being his lead investor in his business and helping him grow it and create, jobs here. And it's everything. It's the whole package that I've enjoyed. And I'm sure we're going to build a very successful company.
Definitely. Talk about PICO and starting PICO.
So PICO stands for People, Ideas, Community, and Opportunity. 4 words which I hold very dearly. And I believe that when you bring those words together, great things happen. And early days of PICO, somebody, an Italian journalist, had come by and asked me about the name. He said to me, PICO, in Italian, piccolino, something very small, it doesn't make sense. And I luckily, I just ignored him. And then a Spanish journalist came in and told me that PICO in Spanish means the peak, right? The peak of a mountain. And that works very well with my beliefs, right? And this idea that we bring together people, idea, community, and opportunity, that together we can reach the peak. And PICO started really as a social enterprise. I was a fellow I still am a fellow in the Aspen Institute in the Middle East Leadership Initiative. On this journey from what they call success to significance, and that we have to take our entrepreneurial skills and try and fundamentally create a better world, a better reality around us. And PICO started as a social enterprise project for myself in Jerusalem, wanting to bring together the entrepreneurial community through a sense of space. I built out this beautiful loft here in an industrial area in Jerusalem that brought people together, basically an open platform policy. If you're a for-profit entrepreneur, you're welcome to kind of sit there and pay what you could. And if you were a social entrepreneur, just come sit for free and be a part of the community. And we very quickly discovered that the energy of bringing together social entrepreneurs and for-profit entrepreneurs created a very unique energy, which drove people to go further. PICO started there. I very quickly found myself exposed to amazing people like Aaron Horowitz, like other entrepreneurs who we ended up backing. You might be, I'm not an investor, but you might be familiar with a company called Via. They provide a lot of public transportation, pool transportation in New York and other cities. That started at PICO. So there's these great people, great opportunities, lots of creativity, great sense of community. And I realized I was going to be investing in startups, and PICO, the place, also became PICO Venture Partners, the fund. And it was born, from a social mission. The entrepreneurs change the world, and I wanted to enable that. And capital is a necessary requirement, right, to build businesses. So the two went very well together.
First of all, Elie, thank you. One last quick question, but I want to point people towards PICO.partners. I don't know if there's any other places we should point people towards online to find out more.
Yeah, so, PICO.partners talks about our values, talks about our portfolio. It's a good place to learn more about us. I would say I used to be really shy, but recently I've done a few more interviews, and I'm happy to be hosted by you here, Jeremy. So I really speak a lot about this nexus of values and being mission driven as an individual, and how that, I think, complements success in business and entrepreneurial drive. And I would encourage your listeners to kind of tune into that. Very much inspired by the values from my home and my upbringing, and other experiences throughout my life. The other place where I talk about things which are important to me is an organization called PICO Kids, which we started, which is really focused on the future generations and giving youth 21st century skills, values, a sense of identity, and understanding, our roles in this world, where we come from, where we're at, where we're going, and each individual's ability to contribute to that. So that would be the other area I would kind of direct you to.
That was my last question, actually, Elie, is PICO Kids, and one of your favorite stories from PICO Kids.
So one of my favorite stories, PICO Kids was born in our office with 12 kids, and it grew to 4,000 children, is an interaction between 9 or 10 young women in 7th grade who were participating in one of our make-a-thons. It's like a hackathon, but you make things. And they had built a prototype for a new diver's watch that provided feedback not only on your own vital signs, but also on your friend's vital signs, whoever you might be diving with. And it was part of a larger make-a-thon about ocean living and rising tides. And I brought in a high-tech executive who was the CEO of a startup called Connect Team, who in his military service in Israel was actually commander of a submarine. And part of the way we work is that we have people from the high-tech industry interact with kids at what we call eye level and treat them like adults and provide real feedback. And his real feedback was, your innovation is going to save lives. Your innovation is going to save the lives of soldiers, of divers, that this is something that we can really take to the Israeli Navy, we can take to civilian industries. And it's that interaction which I believe empowers a child, or in this case, these young women, to say, I can do it. I have what it takes. My creative abilities that every single person, in my belief, in the world has, will get me where I need to go, right? But that lightning bolt of confidence is what inspires me every day. And seeing many young people in PICO Kids with big smiles on their face, with a sense of confidence that they can go out and conquer the mountain and reach that peak, is what I believe we're doing at PICO Kids. I know I have to finish up, Jeremy, but it reminded me of my last story. It'll be a nice bookend to where you started asking me about Craig Weiss. And I was Craig Weiss's mentor as he was building Enjoy. And at one point, we went to Yosemite together, and I called the best day of CEO training. And we were going to climb, I believe it's Yosemite Falls was the name of the hike. It's a 3,000-foot climb, pretty much straight up if you've done it. It's a path, but it's pretty straight up. And I was, I'm still overweight, but I was much more overweight at the time. And, here's Craig, and he's like, we're halfway up, and he's like, in his head, this guy, Elie's not going to make it. Like, I don't, all I need to do is last a little bit longer than him. And then we can go back down and get a nice meal. But, what he saw was my drive and to really go up and conquer that mountain and reach the peak. And nicely, this comes together with PICO in Spanish, unintended, by the way. But this idea that we're constantly climbing mountains, we're wanting to get to the top, and there's always another peak to climb. It's fundamentally what excites me. If you're an entrepreneur, if you're a young person in the world, if you're just, here and want to have, a sense of fulfillment, it's about going out there. It's having the drive to get there, and it's what I would leave you with as we kind of summarize PICO Kids, and the entrepreneurial journey.
Elie, I want to be the first one to thank you. Everyone check out PICO.partners and much more. Check out more episodes. Thanks, everyone.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I'm feeling like 100 grand.